The desert sun beats down mercilessly on a figure collapsed beside a wagon wheel, her worn dress torn and dusty. Rosalie Quinn's crippled leg throbs with each labored breath as she clutches a faded silver locket to her chest. The traveling party that abandoned her has long since disappeared into the heat shimmer, their cruel laughter still echoing in her memory. She closes her eyes, accepting that this barren stretch of New Mexico wasteland will be her grave. But fate has other plans. A lone horseman appears on the horizon, his silhouette cutting through the desert haze. Bo Remington, one of the territory's wealthiest cattle barons, rides with the weight of his own ghosts, haunted by a lost love and years of self-imposed isolation in his Grand Mesa estate. When he finds Rosalie near death, something stirs. Within him that he thought buried forever. Could this mysterious woman be the answer to prayers he stopped saying long ago? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Bo Remington dismounted his black stallion with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent more years in the saddle than most folks had drawing breath. The woman before him lay crumpled like a discarded doll, her chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate gasps. Her dark hair had escaped its pins, fanning across the red dirt like spilled ink, and her dress, once a respectable shade of blue, bore the stains of journey and abandonment. He knelt beside her, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle as he checked for signs of life. The silver locket she clutched caught the afternoon light, and something about its familiar gleam made his heart skip, but there was no time for wondering. The woman needed water, shade, and medical attention, none of which the desert could provide. "Easy now," he murmured, though she showed no signs of consciousness. "You're safe." The ride back to his estate stretched endlessly beneath the blazing sun. Rosalie, he'd found her name scrawled on a piece of paper tucked into her bodice, remained limp in his arms, her head lolling against his chest. Bo found himself studying her face during the journey, noting the elegant curve of her cheekbones, the way her dark lashes rested against pale skin. There was something achingly familiar about her features, though he couldn't place what. The Remington estate rose from the mesa like something from a fever dream, a sprawling adobe mansion with red-tiled roofs and wrought-iron balconies that seemed to defy the harsh landscape around it. Bo had built it with cattle money and heartbreak, creating a sanctuary that felt more like a beautiful prison with each passing year. "Dios mío!" Maria Consuela gasped as Bo carried the unconscious woman through the heavy wooden doors. The housekeeper had been with the Remington family for 30 years, arriving as a young bride when Bo's father still ran the ranch. Now, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, she served as both caretaker and the closest thing to family Bo had left. "Send Jake for Doc Martinez," Bo instructed, his voice tight with concern. "And prepare the blue room." The blue room had been Elena's favorite. Bo hadn't entered it since her death 5 years ago, but something about this mysterious woman seemed to call for that particular space. Perhaps it was the way the afternoon light would filter through the lace curtains. Or maybe it was simply that she deserved better than the stark guest quarters where business associates occasionally stayed. Maria's knowing eyes followed Bo as he climbed the curved staircase, the woman's slight form cradled against his chest. She'd seen her employer's heart break when Elena died, watched him retreat into work and solitude like a wounded animal seeking its den. The fact that he'd brought home a stranger, a woman no less, spoke of something stirring in depths she'd feared had gone cold forever. Dr. Eduardo Martinez arrived within the hour, his black medical bag clutched in hands that had delivered half the babies in the territory and eased the passing of their grandparents. He was a man of few words, but infinite compassion, traits that had made him indispensable in a land where both birth and death often came without warning. Dehydration, exhaustion, and this leg. Doc Martinez examined Rosalie with professional detachment, though his dark eyes softened with sympathy. "Looks like an old injury, poorly set. She's been carrying pain for years, I'd say. Bo stood by the tall windows, watching the doctor work, while his mind wandered to places he'd forbidden it to go. The woman's face in repose reminded him of someone, not just anyone, but someone whose memory he'd wrapped in grief and guilt like burial shrouds. "Will she recover?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. "Sigh, but it will take time. Her body has been through considerable trauma, and not just from the desert." Doc Martinez packed his instruments with practiced efficiency. "Someone abandoned her, Verdad. In her condition, in that heat, it's a miracle you found her when you did." After the doctor left, Bo found himself lingering in the Blue Room's doorway. Maria had changed the woman's clothes, dressing her in one of Elena's white cotton nightgowns. The sight hit him like a physical blow. Another woman in Elena's clothes, in Elena's room, her dark hair spread across Elena's pillow. "Patron," Maria said softly, appearing beside him with the stealth that 60 years of life had taught her. "Perhaps it is time." Time for what? To stop living with ghosts. That evening, Bo sat in his study with a glass of whiskey and a head, full of questions. The woman upstairs remained unconscious, but her presence had already begun to shift something in the carefully ordered world he'd built around his solitude. On his desk lay the few personal effects they'd found with her. The silver locket, a small leather purse containing a few coins, and a piece of paper with her name written in elegant script. Jake Hendricks knocked and entered without waiting. For permission, a privilege earned through 20 years of loyal service. The ranch foreman was a man built like a tree trunk, with hands that could gentle a spooked horse or knock a troublemaker senseless with equal skill. "Boss, you sure about bringing her here?" Jake settled into the leather chair across from Bo's desk, his weathered face creased with concern. "We don't know nothing about her. Could be trouble." "She was dying, Jake. What was I supposed to do, leave her for the buzzards?" "Course not, but—" Jake paused, choosing his words carefully. "Haven't seen you look at another woman since Miss Elena passed. Just wondering if maybe you're seeing things that ain't there." Bo's hand tightened around his glass. "What's that?" "Supposed to mean? Nothing, boss. Just be careful is all. Heart that's been broke once breaks easier the second time." Long after Jake left, Bo remained in his study, staring at the portrait above his fireplace. Elena Morales had been everything a man could want. Beautiful, intelligent, kind, and blessed with a laugh that could chase away the darkest thoughts. She'd been his fiancée, his future, his reason for building something worthy of her grace. The fever had taken her suddenly, cruelly, leaving Bo with nothing but guilt and what-ifs. If he'd insisted on the doctor sooner, if he'd taken her to Santa Fe for treatment, if he'd been a better man, maybe God wouldn't have seen fit to punish him by taking away the only woman he'd ever loved. Now, with another woman lying in Elena's room, Bo felt the careful walls he'd built around his heart beginning to crack. He touched the gold wedding band that hung from a chain around his neck, the ring that should have graced Elena's finger, now worn close to his heart like a talisman against forgetting. Upstairs, in the Blue Room bathed in moonlight, Rosalie. Quinn stirred for the first time in 18 hours. Her eyes fluttered open, taking in unfamiliar surroundings with the confused terror of someone who'd expected to die. The room was beautiful, more beautiful than anything she'd ever seen, with its hand-carved furniture, delicate wallpaper, and the scent of roses drifting through open windows. She tried to sit up and gasped at the sharp pain in her leg, the same leg that had been twisted and broken in a childhood accident, leaving her with a permanent limp that had made her an outcast among her own family. The injury had healed poorly, as most things did for people without money or resources, leaving her dependent on others' charity and increasingly bitter about her lot in life. But someone had saved her. Someone had brought her to this beautiful place and tended her wounds. Through the haze of exhaustion and confusion, she remembered strong arms, a gentle voice, and the overwhelming sensation of safety after so much fear. The silver locket still hung around her neck, its familiar weight, a comfort against her racing heart. Inside the locket was all she had left of her true self, a miniature portrait and a secret she'd carried for 5 long years. The secret of who she really was, and why she could never go back to being the woman everyone believed had died. In the hallway outside her room, Maria Consuela paused in her late-night rounds, listening to the soft sounds of stirring from within. She crossed herself and whispered a prayer in Spanish, asking the Virgin to watch over them all. Something told her that this woman's arrival would change everything in the Remington house, for better or worse. The night wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain across the mesa. In his study below, Beau finally closed Eleanor's portrait and went to check on his unexpected guest, not knowing that the woman upstairs was already awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she dared to hope that she'd finally found a place where she might be allowed to stop running from her past. Dawn broke over the mesa with the soft colors of a watercolor painting, pale pinks and golds that seemed to whisper promises of gentler days. Rosalie woke to the sound of birds singing outside her window and the distant lowing of cattle. Sounds so peaceful they might have been from another world entirely. She lay still for long moments, afraid that movement might shatter this dream of safety and comfort. The sheets beneath her were clean and soft, finer than anything she'd known in her adult life. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on walls papered with tiny blue roses. This was a room where someone had been loved, cared for with attention to every beautiful detail. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. "Signora?" Maria's accented voice called gently. "Are you awake?" "Yes," Rosalie managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Maria entered carrying a breakfast tray, her maternal face creased with concern and kindness. She was a small woman, but there was something substantial about her presence, as if she carried the wisdom of generations in her gentle hands. "How do you feel, mija?" Maria set the tray on the bedside table and helped Rosalie sit up against the pillows. "Alive," Rosalie said simply, then added, "Thanks to your employer, I assume. Senor Beau found you in the desert. You were—" Maria shook her head, crossing herself. "Very close to meeting God, I think." The breakfast was simple but perfect. Eggs cooked just right, warm tortillas, fresh fruit, and coffee that smelled like heaven. Rosalie ate slowly, savoring each bite while Maria bustled around the room, opening windows to let in the morning air. "This room," Rosalie said carefully, looking around at the obvious care that had gone into every detail. "It's beautiful. Does someone else live here?" Maria's hands stilled on the curtains. "This was Senorita Elena's room, Senor Beau's fiancée. She died 5 years ago." The words hit Rosalie like a physical blow, though she couldn't have said why. Perhaps it was the lingering sadness in Maria's voice, or the way the morning light suddenly seemed less bright. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here. In her room—" "No, mija. Senor Beau chose this room for you. Perhaps—" Maria paused, studying Rosalie with sharp eyes that seemed to see too much. "Perhaps it is time this room had life in it again." After Maria left, Rosalie struggled to stand, her injured leg protesting every movement. The twisted limb had been her burden since childhood, when a fall from a horse had left her permanently marked as different, damaged, unworthy of the kind of love she saw evidence of all around this beautiful room. She managed to reach the tall window that looked out over the mesa. The view took her breath away, rolling grassland that stretched to distant mountains, cattle dotting the landscape like dark flowers, and everywhere the sense of space and freedom she'd never known. How different her life might have been if she'd grown up in a place like this, instead of the cramped, bitter household that had shaped her youth. A movement below caught her attention. A man stood in the courtyard, his back to her as he spoke with another man who wore the rough clothing of a ranch hand. Even from this distance, she could see the authority in his posture, the way the other man listened with respectful attention. This had to be Beau Remington, her rescuer. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and shoulders, that spoke of a man accustomed to physical labor despite his obvious wealth. When he turned slightly, she caught a glimpse of his profile, strong-jawed, serious, handsome in the weathered way of men who spent their lives under the open sky. Something stirred in her chest, a flutter of recognition that made no sense. She'd never seen this man before, never been to this place, yet something about him seemed familiar, as if from a half-remembered dream. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Quinn." The voice was deep, masculine and touched, with the kind of courtesy that spoke of good breeding. "May I come in?" "Yes, of course." Bo Remington entered the room, and Rosalie's breath caught in her throat. Up close, he was even more striking. Dark eyes that held depths of sadness and kindness, a mouth that looked as if it had forgotten how to smile, and an overall air of loneliness that called to something deep in her own wounded heart. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his hat in his hands, his manner respectful but distant. "Much better, thanks to your kindness. I don't know how to thank you for saving my life." "No thanks necessary. Any decent person would have done the same." He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "If you don't mind my asking, what were you doing out there alone? It's dangerous country for anyone, but especially for a lady traveling without protection." The question she'd been dreading had finally come. Rosalie looked down at her hands, trying to find words that wouldn't be complete lies. My husband's family was taking me to Santa. When they realized I would slow them down with my leg, She couldn't finish the sentence. Bo's expression darkened. "They abandoned you, left you to die because of an old injury. They said I was dead weight, that a crippled woman would bring them nothing but trouble." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended, carrying all the years of being made to feel worthless because of her damaged leg. "Those weren't decent people," Bo said quietly, and something in his voice made her look up. His dark eyes were fierce with anger on her behalf, anger from a man who barely knew her. "No one deserves to be left like that. No one. You're very kind, Mr. Remington, but the truth is they weren't entirely wrong. I am damaged goods. I have been since I was 12 years old." "That's not true." The words came out sharper than he'd intended, and Bo seemed surprised by his own vehemence. "I'm sorry. It's just a person's worth isn't measured by their physical limitations." There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience with loss and judgment. Rosalie found herself studying his face, noting the lines of grief around his eyes, the way his mouth held itself as if guarding against too much feeling. "Maria told me about your fiancé," she said gently. "I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry to be intruding in her room." Bo was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. She was everything good in this world. When she died, I thought I'd never want to see this room used again, but somehow, having you here feels—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "It feels right." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Rosalie felt her heart beating faster, responding to something in his voice that spoke of loneliness matching her own. "I'll need to leave." "Soon," she said, though the words felt like stones in her throat. "I can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely." "Where would you go?" The simple question revealed the devastating truth of her situation. She had nowhere to go, no one who wanted her, no resources to start over. The family that had abandoned her in the desert had been her last hope for any kind of life. I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Then stay," Bo said quietly, "at least until you're completely recovered. The doctor said your leg needs time to heal properly, and you're still weak from your ordeal. I couldn't possibly. You could help Maria with household tasks, if it would make you feel better about accepting charity. She's not as young as she used to be, and this place is too big for one person to manage alone." It was a kind fiction, and they both knew it. A house of this size would have multiple servants, and Maria clearly ran it with efficient competence. But it gave Rosalie a way to accept his help without feeling like a complete burden. "You're very generous," she said softly. "I'm selfish," Beau replied with surprising honesty. "This house has been too quiet for too long. Maybe some company would do us all good." After he left, Rosalie sank back against the pillows, her mind racing. Everything about this situation felt dangerous, not physically but emotionally. The kindness in Beau Remington's eyes, the way he looked at her as if she were whole and valuable, the growing warmth in her chest when he spoke, all of it threatened the careful walls she'd built around her heart. She couldn't afford to care about this man. There were too many secrets between them, too much of her past that could destroy whatever fragile beginning this might be. The silver locket around her neck seemed to grow heavier with the weight of what it contained. The truth that would change everything if he ever learned it. But for now, for just a little while, she would allow herself to pretend that she was simply Rosalie Quinn, a woman who'd been rescued by a kind man and given a chance to heal. She would pretend that her past couldn't reach her here on this beautiful mesa, and that the growing feelings in her heart weren't built on lies that would eventually destroy them both. Outside her window, Beau stood in his courtyard long after. Their conversation had ended, staring up at the blue room, where a mysterious woman was changing everything he thought he knew about his carefully ordered life. For the first time in 5 years, the future seemed to hold possibilities beyond mere survival. Neither of them noticed Maria watching from the kitchen window, her weathered hands clutched together in prayer as she recognized the signs of 2 wounded hearts beginning to heal. 3 days passed in a haze of healing and careful politeness. Rosalie found herself settling into the rhythm of the house with an ease that surprised her. Each morning, she woke to the sound of cattle and birdsong, took breakfast in the blue room, then spent her day helping Maria with small tasks that didn't require much walking. Her leg was improving slowly, the constant ache diminishing to something more manageable. Dr. Martinez had visited twice, pronouncing himself pleased with her progress and warning her against pushing too hard too soon. The injury was old, he explained, and had been poorly treated initially. Time and patience would be her best medicines. On the 4th morning, Rosalie felt strong enough to venture beyond the confines of her room. Using a walking stick that Jake had carved for her from sturdy oak, she made her way slowly down the curved staircase, marveling again at the beauty of this house. Everything spoke of wealth, tempered by genuine taste. The furniture was well made, but not ostentatious. The artwork carefully chosen, rather than simply expensive. This was a home built by someone who understood the difference between having money and having class. She paused in the main hallway, studying the portraits that lined the walls. Several showed an older couple she assumed were Beau's parents, their faces bearing the same strong features that marked their son. There were landscapes of the ranch through various seasons, and photographs of prize bulls and horses that spoke of Beau's success as a cattleman. But it was the portrait at the end of the hall that stopped her cold. The painting showed a young woman with dark hair and delicate features, wearing a blue dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. She was beautiful in the timeless way of classical paintings, but it wasn't her beauty that made Rosalie's breath catch in her throat. It was the resemblance. The woman in the portrait could have been Rosalie's sister, or perhaps Rosalie herself, if she'd been born to wealth and privilege instead of poverty and struggle. The same dark eyes, the same curve of cheekbone, even the same slight cleft in the chin that Rosalie had always considered one of her few attractive features. "That's Elena." Beau's voice came from behind her, quiet and filled with old pain. Rosalie turned carefully, her heart racing. "She's beautiful. I can see why you loved her." Everyone loved Elena. She had a way of making people feel special, as if they were the most important person in the world when she smiled at them. Beau moved to stand beside Rosalie, his gaze fixed on the portrait. "She was supposed to be my wife." "What happened?" Rosalie asked gently, though part of her dreaded the answer. Fever took her. One day, she was fine, laughing and planning our wedding, and 3 days later, his voice broke slightly. I wasn't even here when she died. I'd gone to Santa Fe on business, thought I'd be back in time. But the fever moved too fast. The pain in his voice was raw and immediate, as if Elena's death had happened yesterday instead of 5 years ago. Rosalie felt an unexpected stab of something that might have been jealousy, not of Elena herself, but of being loved so deeply that even death couldn't diminish it. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "She must have been very special." She was. "And sometimes, when I look at you—" Bo stopped himself, shaking his head as if to clear unwelcome thoughts. "I'm sorry. That was inappropriate." "You see the resemblance too?" Rosalie said quietly. "It wasn't a question. It's uncanny, isn't it? When I first found you in the desert, for just a moment I thought—" He laughed bitterly. "I thought maybe I was losing my mind, seeing things that couldn't be real." They stood in silence for a long moment, both studying the portrait of a dead woman who seemed to watch them with knowing eyes. Finally, Bo cleared his throat and changed the subject. "Maria tells me you're feeling stronger. Would you like to see the rest of the ranch? I could harness the buggy, make it easy on your leg. I'd like that very much." The tour of the ranch revealed the true scope of Bo's success. Thousands of acres of prime grazing land stretched in every direction, dotted with cattle bearing the distinctive R brand. They passed corrals where cowboys worked with horses, barns filled with feed and equipment, and a dozen smaller buildings that supported the vast operation. "This is impressive," Rosalie said as they paused on a hill overlooking the main pastures. "You've built something remarkable here. My father started it, but it was small then, maybe 1,000 head of cattle and twice as many worries." Bo's hands were relaxed on the reins, his posture that of a man completely at home in his environment. "After Elena died, I threw myself into expanding it. Work was the only thing that kept me sane. And now? Now I have more cattle than I know what to do with, more land than one man needs, and a house too big for just one person." He glanced at her sideways. "Sometimes I wonder what the point of it all is. The point is that you've created something lasting, something that will outlive you and provide for generations to come. But what good is a legacy with no one to share it with?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to address directly. Rosalie felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze, and she looked away toward the distant mountains. "Maybe someday you'll find someone," she said carefully. "Maybe, though I'm beginning to think some people only get one chance at love in this life." They were quiet on the ride back to the house, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the main buildings, Jake jogged over to meet them, his weathered face creased with concern. "Boss, we got visitors," he said without preamble. 3 men asking questions about a woman matching. His eyes flicked to Rosalie, then back to Bo. Asking questions. Rosalie felt the blood drain from her face. What kind of questions? "Looking for a woman with a crippled leg, dark hair, traveling alone, said she was a runaway wife who stole something valuable." Jake's tone was carefully neutral, but his eyes were sharp as he studied Rosalie's reaction. "What did you tell them?" Bo asked, his voice gone cold and dangerous. "Told them we hadn't seen hide nor hair of any woman matching that description. But boss," Jake paused meaningfully, "these weren't the kind of men who take no for an answer. They'll be back." Bo helped Rosalie down from the buggy, his touch gentle, but his expression grim. "We need to talk," he said quietly. In his study, with the door closed and the weight of secrets pressing down on them, Bo poured himself a whiskey and offered one to Rosalie. She declined with a shake of her head, her hands twisted together. "In her lap, are you a runaway wife?" he asked directly. "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it. Those men look like trouble, and if they're hunting you, I need to know what I'm dealing with." Rosalie closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her deception pressing down on her like a physical thing. "I was married, briefly, to a man named Thomas Blackwood." Blackwood. Bo's expression darkened further. "I know that name. He's got a reputation as a hard man. Some say worse than hard. He is. Much worse. Rosalie's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The marriage was arranged by my guardian after my parents died. I had no choice in the matter. And on our wedding night, when I saw what kind of man he really was, she shuddered at the memory. He hurt you. He tried to. I fought back. Got away, but not before. She touched her ribs gingerly, remembering the bruises that had finally faded. His family was taking me to his ranch in Texas when I escaped. They were the ones who abandoned me in the desert because they didn't want to explain to Blackwood how they lost his property. The bitter truth of it made Rosalie flinch. Yes. Beau was quiet for a long moment, his jaw clenched with anger. You should have told me sooner. I was afraid you'd send me away, afraid you'd decide I was more trouble than I was worth. And what are you afraid of now? Rosalie met his eyes, seeing her own fear reflected there. That he'll find me, that he'll take me back, that I'll never be free of him. Not while you're under my protection, Beau said firmly. Blackwood may be a hard man, but this is my land, and I protect what's mine. The phrase sent a warm shiver through Rosalie, though she tried not to read too much into it. You don't understand. He has men, resources. He won't give up easily. Neither will I. That evening, as the sun set over the mesa in shades of gold and crimson, Rosalie sat in the blue room and tried to make sense of the day's revelations. Beau's protection felt like a gift beyond price, but it also felt dangerous. The growing feelings between them were complicated enough without adding the threat of her violent husband to the mix. She opened the silver locket and stared at the miniature portrait inside. A painting so small and delicate, it might have been done by fairy hands. The face that looked back at her was her own, but younger, happier, painted in a time when she'd still believed in love and happy endings. Below, in his study, Beau stared at Elena's portrait and tried to understand the turmoil in his heart. The girl resemblance between the two women was uncanny, but it was more than that. Something about Rosalie called to him in ways that had nothing to do with her physical similarity to his lost love. Outside, 3 hard-faced men made camp in the hills overlooking the ranch, their eyes fixed on the lights of the big house where their quarry lay sleeping. They would wait and watch, and when the time was right, they would take back what belonged to Thomas Blackwood, whether she wanted to go or not. The threat of Blackwood's men cast a shadow over the next few days, though life at the ranch continued with careful normalcy. Beau doubled the guards and instructed his men to keep their eyes open for strangers, but he refused to let fear dictate their daily routines. Rosalie found herself spending more time indoors, helping Maria with tasks that kept her safely within the house's protective walls. It was during one of these domestic afternoons that she made a discovery that would change everything. She was helping Maria organize Beau's cluttered study, sorting through years of accumulated papers and correspondence, when her hand brushed against something tucked behind one of the desk drawers. A slim packet of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon, had been deliberately hidden in the narrow space. "What are these?" she asked Maria, holding up the packet. The older woman's face went pale when she saw what Rosalie held. "Ay, Dios mío, those should not be there. Should I put them back?" "No, mija. Perhaps it is time. Senor Beau, he needs to face the truth about many things." Curiosity overcame propriety, and Rosalie carefully untied the ribbon. The letters were written in an elegant feminine hand on expensive stationery, and all were addressed to Elena Morales. But it was the return address that made Rosalie's heart stop. They were from herself, or rather from someone using her true name. With trembling fingers, she opened the first letter, dated just 3 months before Eleanor's supposed death, my dearest. "Elena, I cannot continue this charade much longer. Every day I spend pretending to be someone else, living a life that isn't mine. Feels like a betrayal of everything we promised each other. Beau is a good man, better than I deserve, but he loves a woman who doesn't exist. The arrangement our families made seemed like such a clever solution when we were girls. You would take my place as the poor relation, marry for security, and I would disappear into a comfortable life, away from the expectations and judgments that followed me everywhere. But I never expected to feel guilty about the deception. I never expected him to be so kind, so genuinely loving. I know you're happy with your William, safe in Santa Fe where no one knows your real history. But I'm drowning here, Elena. Every time Bo looks at me with such devotion, I feel like I'm stealing something that belongs to you. He thinks he's marrying Elena Morales, the sweet, innocent girl from a good family. He has no idea he's actually engaged to a woman whose reputation was ruined before she turned 20. Please write soon. I need your counsel more than ever. All my love, your devoted cousin. The letter was signed with a name that made Rosalie's hands shake so violently she nearly dropped the paper. It was signed with her own true name, the name she'd been born with, the name that belonged to the woman everyone believed had died 5 years ago. With growing horror and fascination, she read through the entire correspondence. The letters painted a picture of an elaborate deception between two cousins who had switched identities to escape their respective fates. Eleanor, the real Eleanor, had been in love with a shopkeeper named William and desperate to avoid an arranged marriage. The letter writer herself had been fleeing a scandal and the threat of a forced marriage to a much older man. The final letter was dated just 1 week before Elena's supposed death. Dearest Elena, I've made my decision. I cannot marry Bo under false pretenses. He deserves the truth, even if it means losing him forever. I plan to tell him everything before the wedding, about who I really am, about our deception, about the scandal that drove me here. If he can forgive me, perhaps we can build something real together. If not, I'll disappear as we originally planned, and you can return to claim your life. See the way this charade ends now. I pray you'll understand. The letter was never finished. It ended mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted or had second thoughts. Maria, Rosalie called softly, her voice barely steady. Can you come here, please? The housekeeper appeared in the doorway, took one look at Rosalie's face, and closed the study door behind her. You read them, some of them. Maria, who am I? Mija. That is not for me to say. Please, I need to understand what these letters mean. Maria sank into the chair across from the desk, suddenly looking every one of her 60 years. You really don't remember, do you? Remember what? The fever that nearly killed you. It was so high, for so long. Dr. Martinez said it was a miracle you survived, but it changed you. You didn't remember things the same way after. The room seemed to tilt around Rosalie as the implications crashed over her. You're saying I'm not Rosalie Quinn. You are now. But 5 years ago, you were someone else. Someone who was supposed to marry Senor Bo, but who got sick and— Maria's voice broke. We thought you were going to die. You were so sick, out of your head with fever, talking about running away, about being someone named Rosalie. When you finally woke up, you had no memory of your life before. You believed you were this Rosalie person you'd been talking about. And Bo, he thought you had died. You disappeared from your sickbed one night, and we found only these letters. He believed you had run away rather than marry him, that everything between you had been a lie. It broke his heart. Rosalie stared at the letters scattered across the desk, each one a piece of a puzzle that was reshaping her entire understanding of her life. So when he found me in the desert, he saved the woman he loved. But she didn't remember him, and he had no way of knowing that you had lost yourself trying to become someone else. The locket, Rosalie whispered, her hand flying to her throat. The miniature inside is you, or rather, who you used to be. The sound of boots in the hallway made them both freeze. Maria quickly gathered the letters and shoved them back into their hiding place, but not before Bo appeared in the doorway. What's going on? He asked, his eyes moving between the two women's guilty faces. Nothing, Patron, Maria said quickly. Just organizing your papers. But Bo's attention had shifted to Rosalie, who sat pale and shaken in his desk chair. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Rosalie started, then stopped. How could she explain that she might actually be the ghost, the supposedly dead fiancé he still mourned? She is tired, Maria intervened smoothly. All this work, it is too much so soon after her ordeal. Beau moved around the desk and knelt beside Rosalie's chair, his dark eyes full of concern. You should rest. This can wait. His closeness, his gentle touch on her hand, the familiar way he looked at her. Suddenly it all made a terrible kind of sense. This wasn't a stranger showing kindness to a refugee. This was a man responding to the woman he'd loved and lost, even if neither of them fully understood it yet. Beau, she said softly, studying his face with new eyes. When you look at me, what do you see? I see. He paused, his thumbs stroking across her knuckles in a gesture that felt practiced, familiar. I see someone I want to protect, someone I care about more than I should, given how recently we've met. And does that frighten you? Terrifies me, he admitted, because caring about someone means you can lose them, and I don't think I could survive that kind of loss again. That evening, Rosalie sat in the blue room, Elena's room, her room, staring at her reflection in the vanity mirror. The face that looked back at her was the same one she'd seen every day for 5 years, but now it felt like a stranger's. Somewhere in her mind, locked away by fever and trauma, were memories of this house, of the man downstairs, of a love that had been real, even if it had been built on a foundation of deception. She touched the silver locket, wondering if opening it again might unlock something in her damaged memory. But did she want to remember? The woman in those letters had been tormented by guilt and fear, trapped in a lie that was destroying her. Chance at happiness. Perhaps losing those memories had been a mercy rather than a tragedy. Downstairs, Beau stood in his study, absently shuffling papers and trying to understand the strange currents that seemed to flow through his house these days. Something had changed today, something beyond the usual routine of hiding from Blackwood's men. Rosalie's eyes had held a different quality when she'd looked at him, not just gratitude or growing affection, but something that looked almost like recognition. It was impossible, of course. They'd never met before he found her in the desert, but as he stared at Elena's portrait above the fireplace, Beau couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was playing an elaborate joke on him. First, it had taken away the woman he loved. Now it had given him someone who looked like her, sounded like her, and made him feel things he'd thought buried forever. Outside, the men watching the house settled in for another night of surveillance, unaware that the secrets they sought to uncover ran much deeper than a simple case of a runaway wife. Sleep eluded Rosalie that night. She lay in the darkness of the blue room, staring at the ceiling and trying to piece together fragments of a life she couldn't remember. Every shadow seemed to hold secrets. Every creak of the old house sounded like whispers from the past. Near midnight, restlessness drove her from her bed. Moving carefully on her still tender leg, she made her way to the window that overlooked the courtyard. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light that made the familiar landscape look mysterious and dreamlike. As she watched, a figure emerged from the main house and walked slowly across the courtyard. Even from a distance, she recognized Beau's silhouette. The set of his shoulders, the way he moved with unconscious grace despite the weight he seemed to carry. He stopped beneath an old cottonwood tree and stood there for long minutes, his face turned up toward her window. Did he know she was watching? Was he thinking about her or about the woman who used to live in this room? Impulsively, Rosalie wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the distant sound of night birds calling across the mesa. She found Beau sitting on a stone bench beneath the cottonwood, his elbows resting on his knees. As he stared out at the moonlit landscape, he looked up when he heard her approaching, his expression unreadable in the pale light. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked softly. "Too many thoughts." She settled beside him on the bench, careful to maintain a proper distance despite the intimacy of the hour. You come out here often? Most nights it's peaceful here, helps me think. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly, and the wind whispered through. The grass, with the sound of secrets being shared. Bo, Rosalie said finally, tell me about Elena. Really tell me. Not just the polite version you gave before. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. She was complicated, beautiful, yes, but more than that. She was intelligent, quick-witted, passionate about things that mattered to her, but there was always something she held back. Some part of herself she kept private. What kind of things? Did she care about? Books, mostly. She read everything she could get her hands on. Philosophy, poetry, novels that most people would consider too scandalous for a proper lady. She had strong opinions about women's rights, about social reform. Sometimes I thought she was born into the wrong century. Rosalie felt a strange stirring in her chest, as if his words were awakening something long dormant. She sounds remarkable. She was, but she was also troubled by something she wouldn't share with me. Sometimes I'd catch her staring into space with the saddest expression, as if she was carrying some terrible burden. When I'd ask her about it, she'd just smile and change the subject. Did you ever think she might have been hiding something important? Bo turned to look at her, his eyes sharp despite the darkness. Why do you ask? Just the way you describe her, it sounds like she was fighting some internal battle. Maybe she wanted to tell you the truth about whatever was troubling her, but didn't know how. I've wondered about that, especially after... He stopped himself. After what? After she disappeared. I found some things in her room that suggested she might have been not entirely honest about her past, but by then it was too late to ask her about it. They fell silent again, each lost in their own thoughts. Rosalie found herself studying Bo's profile in the moonlight, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. Something about the sight stirred a feeling of familiarity, so strong it was almost like recognition. Bo, she said carefully, do you ever feel like we've met before? Before you found me in the desert, I mean. He turned to face her fully, his expression intense. Every day, from the moment I saw you, there's been something, I can't explain it. It's like my heart recognizes you, even though my mind knows where. Strangers. What if we weren't strangers? What if somehow, somewhere our paths had crossed before? How could that be possible? I would remember meeting you. Would you? Circumstances change people. Time changes people. Memory can be unreliable. Bo reached out and touched her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Sometimes when I look at you, I see echoes of her. Not just the physical resemblance, but something deeper. The way you tilt your head when you're thinking, the way you bite your lip when you're worried. It's uncanny. Maybe it's not as uncanny as you think. Before he could ask what she meant, the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the peaceful night. Both of them tensed, and Bo was on his feet instantly, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. Jake appeared from the direction of the bunkhouse, his rifle in his hands. Boss, we got riders coming in, 3 of them, moving slow, like they don't want to spook anybody. The same ones from before. Can't tell for sure in this light, but I'd bet money on it. Bo turned to Rosalie, his expression grim. Get back to the house. Lock your door and don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Bo, please. I can handle whatever this is, but I need to know you're safe. The riders came to a stop just outside the main gate, their silhouettes dark against the moonlit sky. One of them called out in a voice that carried clearly across the still air. Remington! We know you're in there, and we know you've got something that belongs to Mr. Blackwood. Bo stepped forward, his posture radiating controlled menace. You're trespassing on private property. I suggest you turn around and ride back where you came from. Can't do that, friend. We're here for the woman, Rosalie Quinn, also known as Mrs. Thomas Blackwood. She's a runaway wife, and her husband wants her back? There's no one here by that name. The lead rider laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Come now, Remington. We've been watching this place for days. We know she's here. Dark hair, crippled leg, probably telling you some sob story about being abandoned. Don't let her fool you. She's a thief and a liar. From her hiding place behind the front door, Rosalie felt ice form in her veins. These weren't just Blackwood's men looking for a runaway wife. They were hunters who'd been tracking her specifically, who knew details about her that suggested they'd been at this for a long time. Even if such a woman were here, Bo said evenly, she'd be under my protection, and I don't give up people under my protection without a damn good reason. Mr. Blackwood figured you might feel that way. That's why he sent us with an offer. The rider reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a thick envelope. It's enough money to buy yourself a nice herd of prime breeding stock. All for one damaged woman who ain't worth the trouble she'll bring you. Not interested. You should think carefully before you refuse, Remington. Mr. Blackwood is a patient man, but his patience has limits, and he's got a long reach. So do I. And this is my land, which means my rules apply here. The lady stays. The riders sat in silence for a long moment, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the leader spoke again. Have it your way. But this ain't over. Mr. Blackwood will have what's his, one way or another. They wheeled their horses around and rode back into the darkness, leaving behind a tension that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Bo stood watching until they were completely out of sight, then turned back toward the house. He found Rosalie in the front hall, her face pale but her chin set with determination. You heard all that, he said. It wasn't a question, yes. And I heard you refuse their offer. Why? Because some things aren't for sale. Your safety is one of them. You don't understand what you're getting into. Thomas Blackwood isn't just a man. He's dangerous, ruthless. He has money and influence, and he doesn't give up on things he considers his property. Then he's going to learn what happens when someone tries to take something from Bo Remington. Despite her fear, Rosalie felt a warm flutter in her chest at the possessive tone in his voice. I'm not worth this kind of trouble. That's not for you to decide. They stared at each other in the lamplight of the front hall, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings and dangerous possibilities. Rosalie found herself stepping closer to him, drawn by something stronger than logic or propriety. Bo, she whispered, there are things about me you don't know. Things that might change how you feel about protecting me. Like what? Like the fact that I might not be who you think I am. Like the fact that my past is more complicated than I've told you. Everyone has secrets, Rosalie. It doesn't change the fact that you're here now and that you matter to me. How can I matter to you? We barely know each other. Maybe, or maybe, we know each other better than either of us realizes. Before she could ask what he meant, he leaned down and kissed her gently, his lips warm and soft against hers. The kiss was tender, almost reverent, but it sparked something in Rosalie that felt like coming home. When they broke apart, she stared up at him with wonder and confusion. That felt familiar. He finished softly, I know, as they stood there. In the lamplight, neither of them noticed the shadow that moved past the study window or the fact that Maria had been listening from the kitchen doorway. Her weathered hands pressed to her heart as she watched two lost souls beginning to find their way back to each other. The kiss changed everything between them, though neither dared acknowledge it openly. Over the next few days, Rosalie found herself acutely aware of Bo's presence whenever he was near. The way he looked at her had shifted from protective concern to something deeper, more complex, and it both thrilled and terrified her. Maria watched the growing tension between them with knowing eyes and increasing worry. Finally, on a morning when Bo had ridden out to check the far pastures and wouldn't return until evening, she cornered Rosalie in the blue room. Mija, we need to talk, the older woman said, closing the door firmly behind her. About what? About the scar on your shoulder. Rosalie's hand flew instinctively to her left shoulder, where a small, crescent-shaped mark was usually hidden by her clothing. How do you... I helped you dress when you first arrived, remember? I've seen that scar before, child. Many times. The room seemed to spin around Rosalie as the implications crashed over her. You know who I am. I've known since the day Senor Beau carried you through that door. The scar, the way you move when you think no one is watching, the little gestures that haven't changed despite everything you've forgotten. Maria's voice was gentle but firm. You are Elena Morales, or you were, before the fever took your memories. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I wanted you to remember on your own. And because... Maria paused, her weathered face creasing with old pain. Because I was afraid of what would happen when you did. Rosalie sank onto the bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Tell me everything. Maria settled beside her, her hands folded in her lap like a woman preparing for confession. You came to us 2 years before you were supposed to marry Senor Beau. Your family had arranged the match, but you were running from something. A scandal, you said, though you never told us the details. The letters mentioned a ruined reputation. Sigh, you found them. I wondered when you would. Maria's expression grew sad. You were so frightened when you first arrived, jumping at shadows, afraid to give your real name. You said you wanted to start fresh, to be worthy of Senor Beau's love. But I was living a lie. You were trying to become the woman you thought he deserved. The problem was, Senor Beau fell in love with the real you, the complicated, passionate, troubled woman you were trying so hard to hide. Rosalie closed her eyes, trying to summon any memory of that time, but found only emptiness where her past should have been. What happened the night I disappeared? You had been sick for 3 days with fever, raging, terrible fever that made you say things. Maria's voice broke slightly. You kept talking about running away, about being someone named Rosalie Quinn, about how you had to escape before the wedding. Dr. Martinez said it was delirium, but I think your mind was trying to find a way out of the guilt that was consuming you. And when I woke up, you believed you were Rosalie Quinn. You had no memory of being Elena, no memory of Senor Beau or this house or the life you'd built here. It was as if your mind had given you exactly what you'd been begging for in your delirium, a chance to escape. Where did I go? How did I end up married to Thomas Blackwood? Maria's expression hardened. That man found you wandering near Santa Fe, confused and alone. He took advantage of your condition, convinced you that you were his ward and that he was protecting you. By the time you realized what kind of man he was, it was too late. Rosalie felt sick as the pieces began falling into place. He married me because I had no memory of who I really was, no family to protect me. And when you tried to escape him, his family was taking you to his ranch in Texas. But you got away during the journey, and they left you in the desert rather than face his anger at losing you. They sat in silence for long minutes, the weight of revelation settling between them like dust after a storm. Finally, Rosalie spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Does Beau suspect? I think his heart knows, even if his mind hasn't accepted it yet. The way he looks at you, the way he touches you, it's the same way he looked at Elena. What am I supposed to do with this information? How can I tell him that the woman he mourned for 5 years has been sitting at his dinner table, sleeping in her old room, letting him fall in love with her all over again? Maybe, Maria said gently. The question isn't how to tell him, but whether you want to remember. What do you mean? The fever gave you a gift, Mija. It took away the guilt, the fear, the terrible weight of living a lie. You've been happy these past weeks, haven't you? Happier than you ever were as Elena. It was true. Despite the danger from Blackwood, despite the uncertainty of her situation, Rosalie had felt more at peace in this house than she could ever remember feeling anywhere else. There was something liberating about being free from the burden of expectations and deceptions that had apparently plagued her previous life. But it's not fair to him, she said. He deserves to know the truth. Does he? Or does he deserve to be happy? Because I've watched him these past weeks, and he's been more alive than he's been since Elena supposedly died. You've given him back his joy, his reason for getting up in the morning. Is that not enough? Before Rosalie could answer, the sound of horses in the courtyard drew their attention to the window. Bo had returned earlier than expected, and he wasn't alone. Jake rode beside him, their expressions grim as they dismounted near the front door. "Something's wrong," Rosalie said, moving toward the door. "Stay here," Maria warned. "Let me find out what's happening first." But Rosalie was already making her way downstairs, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She found Bo in his study, pouring whiskey with hands that shook slightly. His face was dark with anger and something that looked like betrayal. "What's happened?" she asked. He looked up at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. "I rode into town today, had a conversation with Sheriff Morrison about our unwelcome visitors, and turns out Thomas Blackwood isn't just looking for a runaway wife. He's looking for a woman who stole something very valuable from him before she disappeared." Rosalie felt the color drain from her face. "What did he say I stole?" "His most prized possession, a silver locket that belonged to his grandmother, supposedly worth a fortune in sentimental value." Bo's eyes moved deliberately to her throat, where the chain of her locket was visible above her dress collar. "Funny thing is, the sheriff described it perfectly, right down to the miniature portrait inside." The silence that followed was deafening. Rosalie's hand moved instinctively to her throat, covering the locket as if she could hide it from his penetrating stare. "I can explain," she began. "Can you? Because right now I'm wondering who you really are and why you've been lying to me since the moment I found you. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Tell me the truth, Rosalie, or should I call you something else?" The moment hung between them like a blade, sharp and terrible and irreversible. In her peripheral vision, Rosalie saw Maria hovering in the doorway, her face a mask of worry and resignation. "My name," Rosalie said slowly, "is not Rosalie Quinn. I gathered that much. And this locket," she lifted it from her throat with trembling fingers. "It doesn't belong to Thomas Blackwood's grandmother. Who does it belong to?" Rosalie opened the locket with shaking hands, revealing the tiny portrait inside. She held it out to Bo, watching as his expression changed from anger to confusion, to something that might have been recognition. "It belongs to me," she whispered. "It's always belonged to me. Because the woman in this portrait is me." Bo stared at the miniature for a long moment, his face cycling through a dozen emotions. When he finally looked up at her, his eyes held a mixture of wonder and pain that broke her heart. "Elena?" The name came out as barely a breath. "I don't. No, I can't remember. But Maria says... Maria thinks... Dios mío," Maria whispered from the doorway. "It is time for all the truth, mija. Tell him about the fever, about what you've forgotten. Tell him everything." And so, with tears streaming down her face and her heart breaking with every word, Rosalie told Bo about the letters she'd found, about the conversation with Maria, about the possibility that she was the woman he'd loved and lost 5 years ago. When she finished, the study was so quiet she could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway. Bo sat frozen in his chair, the open locket still in his palm, staring at her as if she were a ghost made flesh. "All this time," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "All this time, you've been here. I've been mourning a woman who was sitting across from me at dinner, sleeping in the room above my head, letting me fall in love with her again without knowing who she was. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Bo. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. But you suspected. These past few days you suspected. Yes, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd hate me for the deception. Afraid of what I might have done to deserve losing my memory in the first place." Bo stood abruptly, pacing to the window where he stood with his back to her. "The Elena I knew was planning to run away, rather than marry me. According to those letters, our entire relationship was built on lies. Maybe. But what we have now, what's growing between us now, that's real. I may not remember loving you before, but I'm falling in love with you now, as I am, as you are, with no deceptions between us. How can I trust that? How can I trust anything you say when I don't even know who you really are?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Rosalie felt something inside her chest crack and bleed. I understand if you can't. I understand if you want me to leave. Leave? Bo turned around, his expression fierce. You think I'd let you go back to Blackwood after learning all this? You think I'd let him get his hands on you again? Then, what do you want from me? He stopped, running his hands through his hair in frustration. I want to understand how the woman I loved could disappear without a trace, then come back into my life as someone else entirely. I want to know if any of what we had was real, or if it was all just an elaborate performance. I wish I could tell you. I wish I could remember what I felt for you then, what drove me to run away, what made me think I wasn't worthy of your love. Rosalie's voice broke on the last words. But I can't. All I have is now, and what I feel for you now is more real than anything I've ever experienced. Outside, the sun was setting over the mesa, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. That should have been beautiful, but felt instead like an omen of endings. In the growing darkness, 3 riders sat on a distant hill, watching the lights come on in the big house, and waiting for their chance to reclaim what they'd been sent to retrieve. The revelation hung between them like a thundercloud, heavy with the weight of 5 years' worth of grief, guilt, and misunderstanding. Bo stood at the window, his shoulders rigid with tension, while Rosalie, Eleanor, remained seated, clutching the open locket as if it might anchor her to some semblance of truth in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. There's more, Maria said quietly from the doorway. Things that need to be said if we're going to have all the truth. Both Bo and Rosalie turned to look at her, and the older woman stepped fully into the room, her face grave with the weight of secrets she'd carried too long. The night you disappeared, Elena, the night of the fever, you weren't just delirious. You were trying to tell us something important, something about papers, documents that proved you weren't who we thought you were. What kind of documents? Bo asked, his voice carefully controlled. Marriage papers. You kept saying you were already married, that you couldn't marry Senor Bo because it would be a sin. We thought it was the fever talking, but... Maria moved to the bookshelf behind Bo's desk and ran her fingers along the spines until she found what she was looking for, a thick, leather-bound volume that looked like a family Bible. From between its pages, she withdrew a folded document, yellowed with age and brittle at the edges. I found this in your room after you disappeared. I kept it hoping that someday you would come back and explain what it meant. With trembling hands, Rosalie took the document and unfolded it carefully. The elegant script was faded, but still legible, and as she read the words, her face went white. What is it? Bo demanded. It's a marriage certificate, she whispered, dated 6 months before I came to this ranch. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the clock, and the distant sound of cattle lowing in the evening air. Bo moved closer, reading over her shoulder, his expression growing darker with each line. Elena Morales, married to Thomas Blackwood. His voice was flat, dangerous. You were already his wife when you came here, but I don't understand. Rosalie said, staring at the document in confusion. I don't remember any of this. And Maria said I was running from a scandal, not from a marriage. Perhaps, Maria said gently, the scandal was the marriage itself. What do you mean? Look at the date, Mija. Look at the signatures. Rosalie studied the certificate more carefully, noting details she'd missed in her initial shock. The date was indeed 6 months before she'd arrived at the Remington Ranch, but something about the signatures looked wrong. Her own name was written in a shaky, uncertain hand, not at all like the confident script she'd seen in the letters. This signature, she said slowly, it doesn't look like my handwriting. Because you didn't sign it willingly, Maria said. The night of your fever, you kept saying you'd been forced, that they'd made you sign papers you didn't understand. Bo took the certificate from her hands, examining it with the keen eye of a man who dealt with his share of legal documents. In business, this is a legal marriage, regardless of the circumstances, which means when Blackwood found me after I lost my memory, He wasn't taking advantage of a confused woman, Rosalie finished. He was reclaiming his legal wife. The implications crashed over all of them like a wave. If Rosalie was legally married to Thomas Blackwood, then everything that had happened since, her growing feelings for Beau, their kiss the other night, the tentative plans for a future together, was not just complicated, but potentially criminal. There has to be a way out of this, Beau said grimly. Forced marriage, coercion, surely those things can be challenged in court. With what proof? Rosalie asked. I can't remember what happened. I can't testify to being forced if I have no memory of the event. But I can. They all turned to see Jake standing in the doorway, his weathered face grim with the weight of knowledge he'd clearly carried for too long. Jake? Beau frowned at his foreman. What are you talking about? I can testify to what happened because I was there. Jake stepped into the room, removing his hat respectfully. Been carrying this burden for 5 years, wondering if I should have spoken up sooner. You were where? Rosalie asked. Santa Fe. I was there on ranch business when it happened. Saw the whole thing, you being dragged into that church by Blackwood, and 2 of his men crying and fighting every step of the way. Saw them force you to sign those papers while one of them held a gun to your back. The room erupted in shocked silence. Beau's face went white with rage, while Rosalie felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Why didn't you tell me? Beau demanded. Because I didn't know who the woman was at the time. Wasn't until she came here, supposedly as your fiancée Eleanor, that I realized I'd seen her before, and by then, Jake shrugged helplessly. By then she seemed happy, and you were happy, and I figured maybe it was best to let sleeping dogs lie. You should have told me. Beau repeated, his voice deadly quiet. Yes, sir. I should have, but I was a coward, and I thought, maybe if I kept quiet, it would all work out somehow. Rosalie stood abruptly, pacing to the fireplace, where Elena's portrait watched over them with knowing eyes. So, I was forced into marriage with Blackwood, then came here under false pretenses to marry you, then lost my memory and forgot everything. And now Blackwood wants me back because I'm legally his wife, regardless of how that marriage came about. That's about the size of it, Jake said miserably. But there's something else, Maria added quietly. Something I haven't told you yet. All eyes turned to her, and the housekeeper took a deep breath before continuing. The fever that took your memory. It wasn't natural. Dr. Martinez always suspected as much, but could never prove it. What do you mean, not natural? Beau asked. I mean someone gave you something to bring on that fever, something to make you sick enough to make you forget. The accusation hung in the air like a curse. Rosalie felt her legs give out, and she sank into the nearest chair. You're saying someone deliberately tried to erase my memory? I'm saying that the night before you got sick, you told me you were going to tell Senior Beau everything. About the forced marriage, about why you'd really come here, about your plan to have the marriage annulled so you could marry him legally. You said you were tired of living with lies, and the next day I was burning with fever, Rosalie whispered. See, too convenient to be coincidence. Beau's expression had gone from shock to fury to something that might have been murder. You're telling me that someone, probably one of Blackwood's people, poisoned Elena to keep her from revealing the truth about their sham marriage. I'm telling you what I've suspected for 5 years, but could never prove. But why would they want to erase my memory instead of just killing me? Rosalie asked. Because dead you would be beyond Blackwood's control, Maria explained. But alive and without memory, you could be manipulated, controlled, made to believe whatever he wanted you to believe. Like that, you were his ward. And he was protecting you, Jake added grimly. The full scope of the deception was staggering. Rosalie had been the victim of an elaborate scheme designed to trap her in a marriage she'd never consented to, then to erase her memory when she tried to escape that trap. There's something else, she said slowly, a memory surfacing from the fog of her recent past. When Blackwood's family was taking me to Texas, they kept talking about how I was finally coming home, but they also mentioned something about making sure I never remembered the other life. They knew, Beau said. with deadly certainty. They knew exactly who you were and what they'd done to you, which means they probably still have whatever they used to drug me, Rosalie realized. If we could find it, prove what they did, it would invalidate the marriage, Bo finished. Coercion, drugging, memory manipulation. Any court in the territory would annul that marriage in a heartbeat. For the first time since the revelations had begun, hope flickered in Rosalie's chest. But how do we prove any of this? It's our word against theirs, and they have the legal marriage certificate. We get you examined by a doctor who specializes in these things, Bo said grimly. There are physicians in the East who study memory loss, poisoning, that sort of thing. If there's any trace left in your system, that was 5 years ago, Jake pointed out. Ain't likely to be any evidence left now. Then we find another way. Bo's voice carried the determination of a man who'd found something worth fighting for. We find the people who were there, get them to testify. We investigate Blackwood's background. Look for other women he might have done this to. And in the meantime? Rosalie asked. In the meantime, you stay here where you're safe. Marriage certificate or no marriage certificate, I'm not letting him take you. That might not be legally possible, Maria said gently. If she's truly his wife, she's not his anything, Bo said fiercely. Legal papers don't make a marriage real. Love makes a marriage real. Commitment, trust, partnership, those are the things that make a marriage. What Blackwood has is a piece of paper obtained through force and deception. Rosalie felt tears burning behind her eyes. Even if we could prove everything, even if we could get the marriage annulled, I'm still not the woman you fell in love with. Elena is gone, Bo. The woman you loved, with all her memories and experiences, and personality. She's gone forever. Is she? Bo moved to stand in front of her, his dark eyes intense. Because when I look at you, I see the same intelligence, the same courage, the same passionate heart that made me fall in love with Elena in the first place. Maybe you don't remember loving me before, but the capacity for that love is still there. I can see it in your eyes. How can you be sure? Because you kissed me back the other night. Because you look at me the same way Elena used to look at me when she thought I wasn't watching. Because your heart recognizes mine, even if your mind doesn't remember. Before she could respond, the sound of shattering glass from the front of the house interrupted them. Jake was moving before the last shard had hit the floor, his rifle appearing in his hands as if by magic. "Stay down," he ordered, motioning for the others to get behind the desk. More glass broke, followed by the heavy thud of boots on the front porch. A voice called out, rough and commanding, "Remington! We know you're in there, and we know you've got our property. Send out Mrs. Blackwood and nobody has to get hurt." Bo drew his own gun, checking the chambers with practiced efficiency. "How many of them, Jake?" "Hard to say. At least 5, maybe more. They've got the front and back covered. The windows? Broken glass everywhere. They're not planning to leave us any easy way out." Rosalie clutched the marriage certificate to her chest, feeling the weight of its implications. "This is my fault. They're here because of me." "No," Bo said firmly. "They're here because they're criminals who think they can take what doesn't belong to them, but they're about to learn different." Outside, Blackwood's voice called again, closer now, as if he was standing just beyond the front door. "Elena, I know you can hear me, darling. Time to come home. Your husband is waiting." The word husband hit like a physical blow, carrying with it all the legal weight of that damning certificate. But as Rosalie looked around the room, at Bo's determined face, at Maria's fierce loyalty, at Jake's protective stance, she realized something important. Legal or not, forced or not, that piece of paper was just that, a piece of paper. It had no power over her heart, no claim on her soul, no right to determine her future. "Let them come," she said quietly, surprising everyone, including herself. "I'm not going anywhere." Outside, Thomas Blackwood smiled grimly at her words, carried clearly through the broken windows. His little dove had grown claws during her time away from him, but no matter. He'd tamed her once before, and he could do it again. The real fight was just beginning. The siege began with the methodical efficiency of men who'd done this before. Blackwood's forces moved around the house like wolves circling wounded prey, cutting off escape routes and establishing positions that would give them clear lines of sight on every door and window. Bo moved through his house with the calm competence of a man who'd learned warfare in harder schools than most. The Remington estate hadn't been built just for comfort. His father had constructed it during the Apache Wars, and every room had been designed with defense in mind. Thick adobe walls, narrow windows, and strategic sightlines that now served. "Well, Maria, take Elena upstairs to the back bedroom," he instructed, checking his father's old Colt revolver with reverent care. The weapon was a peacemaker that had seen action in 3 wars. Its walnut grips worn smooth by hands that had never known defeat. "That room has the best protection and a clear view of the rear approach. I'm not hiding while you fight my battles," Rosalie protested, but her voice lacked conviction. The sight of Bo handling the weapon with such familiarity reminded her that despite his gentleman's manners and educated speech, he was a man forged by the harsh realities of frontier life. "You're not hiding," Bo said gently, holstering the Colt and reaching for the Winchester rifle mounted above the fireplace. "You're taking the high ground. That room commands the best view of the courtyard, and if things go badly down here, you'll be able to see anyone trying to approach from behind." Jake had already positioned himself at the front windows, his own rifle resting on the sill as he tracked movement in the darkness beyond. "Boss, they're being mighty patient out there. Usually men like this come in hard and fast. They want her alive and undamaged," Bo replied grimly. "Hard to do that if they turn this into a shooting war." "Maybe I should just go with them," Rosalie said quietly. "End this before anyone gets hurt." The suggestion earned her sharp looks from all 3 of her protectors. It was Maria who spoke first, her voice fierce with protective anger. "Absolutamente no. You think we would let you sacrifice yourself to those animals after everything they've done to you?" "Maria's right," Bo added, his dark eyes flashing with something dangerous. "You're not going back to him, Elena. Not willingly, not unwillingly, not ever. But that marriage certificate is a piece of paper signed under duress by a woman who was drugged and coerced," Jake interrupted. "Any decent judge would throw it out in a heartbeat." Outside, Blackwood's voice carried clearly through the broken windows, cultured and reasonable in a way that made his words even more chilling. "Remington, I'm a reasonable man, and I don't want any unnecessary bloodshed. All I want is what belongs to me, my wife, and the property she took when she ran away." "Property?" Rosalie touched the locket at her throat, understanding dawning on her face. "He's not just talking about me." Bo's expression hardened. "What else did you take when you escaped?" "I don't know. I can't remember what I had with me when he found me after the fever." She closed her eyes, trying to force memories that remained frustratingly out of reach. But the way his men talked during the journey to Texas, they mentioned something. About papers, documents that I'd hidden somewhere. "What kind of documents?" I think I might have taken evidence. Proof of what he did to me, maybe proof of what he's done to other women." The implications of this revelation settled over them like a shroud. If Rosalie had indeed taken evidence of Blackwood's crimes, it would explain his persistence in hunting her down. A runaway wife was one thing. A runaway wife with the means to destroy him was quite another. "Elena," Bo said urgently, "try to remember, where would you have hidden something important? Somewhere safe, somewhere only you would think to look?" She shook her head in frustration. "I've tried. It's like trying to remember a dream after you wake up. The harder I try, the more it slips away." "Don't try to force it," Maria said gently. "Sometimes the mind protects us from things we're not ready to handle. When you're ready, the memories will come." A new voice joined Blackwood's from outside, harsher, more impatient than his employer's cultured tones. "Time's up, Remington. Send her out or we start shooting." "That's not Blackwood," Jake observed, squinting through the darkness. "Someone else is calling the shots now." His enforcer, probably, Bo replied. The kind of man who gets hired when patience runs out. As if to prove his point, a rifle shot cracked through the night air, sending wood splinters flying from the doorframe near Jake's position. The foreman ducked instinctively, then returned fire, his shot ringing out across the courtyard. So much for negotiation, he muttered. More shots followed, systematic and deliberate, designed to keep the defenders pinned down rather than inflict casualties. It was the work of professionals who understood the value of their target and the importance of taking her alive. They're trying to wear us down, Bo observed, moving from window to assess their situation. Keep us pinned until we run out of ammunition or make a mistake. How long can we hold out? Rosalie asked. Depends on how many men they brought and how patient they're willing to be, Jake replied. We've got enough ammunition for a decent fight, and this house was built to withstand a siege, but eventually... He didn't need to finish the sentence. Eventually, they would either run out of supplies or Blackwood would bring in enough men to overwhelm their defenses. There might be another way, Bo said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. Jake, what do you know about the old mine tunnels in the hills behind the house? Been closed for 20 years or more. Why? Because my father used to talk about a passage that connected the mine to the root cellar, emergency escape route in case of Indian attacks. Jake's weathered face lit up with understanding. You think it's still possible? Only one way to find out. If it is, we could get Elena out of here into safety while they're focused on the house. And leave you to face them alone, Rosalie protested. Absolutely not. It's the smart play, Bo insisted. Once you're safe, they have no reason to stay. Their whole operation falls apart if they don't have you. Or they burn down your house and kill you out of spite, she countered. I won't be responsible for your death, Bo. I've already cost you too much. Before he could argue further, Maria appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale with urgency. Patron, there are men trying to get onto the roof. I can hear them, moving around up there. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had started as a standoff was becoming a coordinated assault, with Blackwood's forces probing for weaknesses in their defenses. Jake, take the back stairs and see if you can get a shot at whoever's on the roof, Bo ordered. Maria, you and Elena get to the root cellar and see if that passage is really there. What about you? Rosalie asked. I'm going to give them something to think about. Bo checked his weapons one final time, his expression grim with determination. Maybe buy you enough time to get away. Bo, no, there has to be another way. He turned to face her fully, and in his dark eyes she saw the same intensity that had drawn her to him from the beginning, the strength of a man who would fight impossible odds for something he believed in. Eleanor, he said softly, using her real name for the first time since learning the truth. 5 years ago, I lost you because I wasn't there to protect you. I won't make that mistake again. Before she could protest, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with desperate passion, pouring 5 years of grief and regret and hope into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I love you, he said simply. I loved Elena, and I love Rosalie, and I love whoever you choose to be from now on. But I can't love anyone if you're not alive to be loved. I love you too, she whispered, the words coming from some deep place in her heart that transcended memory. Which is why I can't leave you to die for me. You're not leaving me to die. You're giving me something to live for. A crash from somewhere. Above their heads ended the tender moment. Jake's rifle fired twice in rapid succession, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the ground outside. Got one of them, the foreman called down. But there's more coming. Go, Bo urged, pressing something metallic into Rosalie's hand. She looked down and saw a small silver key. That opens the gun safe in the root cellar. If the tunnel's there, you'll find weapons and supplies at the other end. What if it's not there? What if it's collapsed or blocked? Then you come back here and we make our stand together. His smile was fierce and proud. But either way, we don't give up. We don't surrender, and we don't let them win. As Maria led her toward the basement stairs, Rosalie looked back one last time at the man who'd become her anchor in a world of shifting truths and dangerous lies. He stood silhouetted against the lamplight, his father's Colt in his hand, and death in his eyes for anyone who threatened what he protected. In the root cellar, surrounded by the earthy smell of stored vegetables and the musty scent of old wood, Maria began moving barrels and crates with surprising strength. "Help me, Mija," she said urgently. "If Senor Beau's father was as clever as he was brave, we'll find what we're looking for." Together, they cleared away years of accumulated storage until Maria's searching hands found what they were looking for. A section of the stone wall that sounded hollow when tapped. "Here," she breathed. "Help me find the mechanism." Their fingers traced along the stones until Rosalie felt something give way beneath her touch. A section of the wall swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow passage that stretched away into darkness. "Gracias a Dios," Maria whispered. "It's still here." But as they peered into the tunnel, both women realized their escape route came with its own dangers. The passage was narrow, low-ceilinged, and filled with the kind of absolute darkness that could hide any number of threats. Above their heads, the sound of gunfire was getting closer, more intense. Whatever was happening up there, time was running out. "Are you ready, Mija?" Maria asked, lighting an oil lamp with hands that shook only slightly. Rosalie thought of Beau upstairs, facing impossible odds to give her this chance. She thought of the life she might remember someday, and the life she was building with each choice she made. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. Together they stepped into the darkness, carrying with them the hope that somewhere at the end of this tunnel lay not just escape, but the key to reclaiming a future that seemed to slip further away with each passing moment. The tunnel stretched ahead of them, like a throat waiting to swallow them whole. Maria's lamp cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, and the air was thick with the smell of earth and old timber. They moved as quickly as Rosalie's injured. Leg would allow, the sound of their footsteps muffled by years of accumulated dust. Behind them, the gunfire grew more sporadic but more intense, suggesting that Beau and Jake were making their attackers pay dearly for every advance. Each shot that rang out made Rosalie's heart clench with fear for the man she was leaving behind. "How much farther?" she whispered, though there was no real need for quiet in the abandoned tunnel. "I don't know, Mija. You're Beau's father, he never told us exactly where it came out." Maria's voice was steady, but Rosalie could hear the strain beneath it. The older woman was pushing herself hard, driven by the same fierce protectiveness that had made her keep Elena's secrets for 5 years. They pressed on through the darkness, the lamp's glow revealing supporting timbers that looked disturbingly old and unstable. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, and occasionally small stones would rattle down from the ceiling, reminders of how precarious their underground refuge really was. It was when they paused to rest that Rosalie noticed something odd. Her silver locket, which had been warm against her skin throughout their escape, was now almost hot to the touch. When she opened it to check on the miniature portrait inside, she gasped, "Maria, look at this." The older woman held the lamp closer, and both women stared in amazement. The locket, which Rosalie had opened dozens of times since finding it, was revealing something new. What she had always taken to be the simple gold backing behind the portrait was actually a thin sheet of metal that had warped slightly in the tunnel's humid air, revealing the edge of something hidden beneath. "There's something behind the portrait." Rosalie breathed. With careful fingers, she worked at the edge of the hidden compartment until it popped open. Inside was a tightly folded piece of paper, so small it was almost impossible to believe it could contain anything significant. "What does it say?" Maria asked urgently. Rosalie unfolded the paper with trembling hands, squinting to read the tiny script by lamplight. As the words became clear, her face went white. "It's a list," she whispered. "Names, dates, places. Maria, this is a record of other women. Women Blackwood forced into marriage. Women who disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. Dios mio, how many? 12 names. 12 women over the past 10 years. Rosalie's voice was shaking with horror and rage. "And there are notes beside each name. Died of fever. Riding accident. Disappeared. They're all dead, Maria. All of them except you. And there's something else." Rosalie pointed to the bottom of the list, where a different hand had written additional notes. Bank, account numbers, property records, inheritance documents. He's been marrying wealthy women, then killing them for their money. The implications were staggering. Blackwood wasn't just a violent husband. He was a systematic killer who had turned marriage into a lucrative form of murder. And somehow, Elena had discovered his secret and documented it before her own planned death. That's why he wants you. Back so desperately, Maria realized. It's not about love or even possession. It's about survival. If this evidence gets out, he'll hang, Rosalie finished grimly. Or worse. A distant rumble from somewhere behind them reminded both women that they weren't safe yet. The tunnel itself might be hidden, but if Blackwood's men discovered the entrance in the root cellar, they would be trapped like rats in a maze. "We have to keep moving," Maria urged. "And when we get out of here, we have to get this to the authorities." They pressed on with renewed urgency, the precious documents safely tucked back into the lockets. Secret compartment. The tunnel began to slope upward, and the air grew fresher, suggesting they were nearing the exit. It was Rosalie who spotted the first gleam of starlight ahead, filtering down through what looked like a partially collapsed opening. When they reached it, they found themselves looking up through a natural chimney in the rock, with handholds carved into the stone wall. "Can you climb with your leg?" Maria asked worriedly. "I have to." Rosalie tested the first handhold, wincing as her injured leg protested. "Maria, if something happens to me, promise you'll get that evidence to Sheriff Morrison. Promise me those women won't have died for nothing. Nothing is going to happen to you, Mija. We've come too far to give up now." The climb was agonizing. Each movement sent fire through Rosalie's damaged leg, and the handholds were slippery with moisture and age. But the thought of Beau fighting for his life behind them, and the knowledge that 12 dead women were counting on her courage, drove her upward. When she finally pulled herself through the opening, she found herself in a small clearing, surrounded by scrub oak and juniper. The old mine entrance was barely visible, hidden by years of rockfall and overgrowth. From here, she could see the lights of Beau's house in the distance, and the muzzle flashes that told her the fight was still ongoing. Maria emerged moments later, breathing hard but determined. "Where now?" "We circle around to town, get the sheriff and his deputies, bring them back with enough firepower to end this." Rosalie took one last look at the house where she'd found more happiness in a few weeks than she could remember having in years. "And we pray we're not too late." But as they started down the hillside, a voice from the shadows stopped them cold. Well, look what crawled out of the ground." 3 men stepped from behind the trees, their guns drawn and pointed directly at the 2 women. Rosalie recognized the leader from her fragmentary memories of the journey to Texas, Blackwood's chief, enforcer, a man with dead eyes and the kind of smile that promised pain. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said with mock courtesy, "your husband's been looking all over for you." "I'm not going back to him," Rosalie said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Oh, but you are. You see, we've got something you want." He gestured toward the house, where the gunfire had suddenly stopped. "Your boyfriend down there, he's still breathing, but that could change real quick if you don't come along peacefully." "You're lying." "Am I?" "Boys, give the lady a demonstration." One of the other men raised his rifle and fired 3 deliberate shots toward the house. Moments later, an answering volley came from the windows, proving that Beau was indeed still alive. "For now," the enforcer said meaningfully, "but my boss is getting impatient. And when he gets impatient, people tend to get hurt. Permanently." Maria stepped closer to Rosalie, her aged hands clenched into fists. "You cannot take her. She is under our protection." "Your protection?" The Daidish enforcer laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Lady, you're about 70 years old and armed with a lamp. What kind of protection is that?" "The kind," Maria said quietly, that comes from knowing where all the bodies are buried. Something in her tone made the enforcer's smile falter. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Rosalie said, understanding flooding through her, that Maria has been keeping records too. Haven't you, Maria? The older woman's face was grim but proud. For 30 years I have worked for the Remington family, and for 30 years I have seen what men like Blackwood do to women they think are helpless. I have made it my business to remember everything. You don't know nothing about Mr. Blackwood, one of the other men snarled. I know about Sarah Peterson in Albuquerque, Maria said calmly. Married in March, dead of fever in June. I know about Mary Catherine Wells in Santa Fe. Married in August, riding accident in November. I know about— Shut up! The enforcer's voice cracked like a whip. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that 12 women have died, and I know that if anything happens to Elena or to Senor Beau, my testimony will reach the territorial governor himself. Maria's voice carried the authority of absolute conviction. I know people. You see, important people who trust my word. The standoff stretched taut as a wire, 3 armed men facing 2 women in the starlight, while below them, the house where good men fought for their lives waited for a resolution that could go either way. It was the locket that decided it. As Rosalie shifted her weight, trying to ease the pressure on her injured leg, the silver chain caught the moonlight and drew the enforcer's attention. Well now, he said, his voice gone soft and dangerous. That's a pretty little trinket. Mind if I have a look? Yes, I mind. Wasn't really a request. He stepped forward, his gun trained on Maria. See, my boss has been wondering what happened to certain documents that went missing around the time you disappeared. Documents that could cause him considerable embarrassment if they fell into the wrong hands. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do, and I'm betting those documents are a lot smaller than most people would think. Small enough to hide in, say, a locket that a sentimental woman might carry close to her heart. The game was up, and they all knew it. Rosalie's hand moved instinctively to her throat, confirming the enforcer's suspicions, even as she tried to deny them. Hand it over, Mrs. Blackwood, nice and easy, and maybe your boyfriend lives to see another sunrise. In the distance, a single gunshot rang out from the house, followed by an ominous silence. The enforcer smiled at the sound. Tick-tock, he said softly. Time's running out. Rosalie looked at Maria, seeing her own desperation reflected in the older woman's eyes. They'd come so far, learned so much, only to be caught at the moment of triumph. But sometimes, she realized, triumph wasn't about winning. Sometimes it was about making sure the truth survived even if you didn't. Slowly, she reached for the locket's chain, her fingers working at the clasp with deliberate care. The enforcer watched her every movement, his gun never wavering. That's better, he said. Real smart choice. What he didn't see was the way Rosalie's thumb worked at the locket's hidden catch as she lifted it over her head, or how she managed to palm the tiny folded document just before she tossed the locket to the ground at his feet. There, she said. You have what you came for. The enforcer bent to pick up the locket, his attention focused on his prize. It was exactly the opening Maria had been waiting for. The old woman moved with surprising speed, swinging her heavy lamp in a vicious arc that caught the nearest gunman in the temple. He dropped like a stone, his rifle clattering away into the darkness. "Run!" Maria shouted, but Rosalie was already moving, diving for the fallen rifle as the other 2 men spun to face this unexpected threat. The world exploded into chaos. Rosalie rolled behind a fallen log, the rifle clutched in her hands as bullets whined overhead. Maria had disappeared into the shadows between the trees, moving with the stealth of someone who'd spent a lifetime navigating dangerous situations. The enforcer was shouting orders, his voice tight with rage. "Find them! They can't have gone far!" But the mountainside was dark and treacherous, full of rocks and gullies that could hide a dozen people. Rosalie pressed herself against the earth, feeling the precious document crumpled in her palm. Whatever happened now, the truth about Blackwood's crimes would survive. A boot crunched on gravel nearby, and she held her breath as one of the gunmen passed within arm's reach of her hiding place. When he moved on, she risked a glance toward the house below. The silence from that direction was ominous. No gunfire, no movement, just the yellow glow of lamplight in the windows. Elena, the voice that called her name, wasn't one of Blackwood's men. It was cultured, educated, and filled with the kind of poisonous charm that had fooled her once before. "Elena, my dear, I know you can hear me." Thomas Blackwood himself had arrived. Rosalie peered through the undergrowth and saw him standing in the clearing near the mine entrance, flanked by two more armed men. He was exactly as she remembered from her fragmentary memories. Tall, well-dressed, handsome in a cold way that reminded her of a snake basking in the sun. "There's no point in hiding, darling," he continued, his voice carrying easily through the still air. "Your brave protector is no longer in a position to help you. Neither is his faithful foreman. It's just you and me now, as it should be." The IH words hit Rosalie like physical blows. Bo, Jake, were they really? "Don't believe him, Mija," Maria's voice whispered from somewhere nearby. "Men like him, they lie as easily as breathing." But doubt gnawed at Rosalie's heart. The silence from the house was too complete, too final, and if Bo was truly gone— "I know what you're thinking," Blackwood said, as if he could read her thoughts. "You're wondering if I'm telling the truth about your lover. Would you like proof?" He gestured to one of his men, who tossed something into the clearing. Even in the darkness, Rosalie could see what it was. Bo's distinctive silver belt buckle, the one with the Remington brand engraved on it. He fought bravely. "I'll give him that," Blackwood continued, "but he was outnumbered and outgunned, just like you are now." Rage and grief warred in Rosalie's chest, but she forced herself to think clearly. If Bo was really dead, then mourning him would have to wait. Right now, she had to survive long enough to make sure his sacrifice meant something. "What do you want?" she called out, rising from her hiding place but keeping the rifle ready. "What I've always wanted, my wife, my property, and the return of certain items that were taken from me. I don't have anything that belongs to you." Blackwood laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Oh, but you do. You see, I know about your little discovery in the tunnel. My men saw you examining something by lamplight, something small enough to hide in a locket." He held up the silver chain, letting it dangle in the moonlight. "Unfortunately, this appears to be empty, which means you've hidden my property somewhere else. Maybe I destroyed it." "No, you didn't. You're too smart for that. You know that evidence is your only leverage, your only hope of survival. So here's what's going to happen." Blackwood's voice turned businesslike, as if he were negotiating a cattle sale. "You're going to give me those documents, and then you're going to come home with me like a good wife. In return, I'll make your death quick and relatively painless. That's your idea of a bargain. The alternative is that I let my men have some fun with you before you die. Trust me, you don't want that." Rosalie felt something shift inside her. A crystallization of all the fear and anger and determination that had been building since she'd first learned the truth about her past. This man had stolen years of her life, murdered 12 innocent women, and now threatened to destroy the only home she'd ever known. "I have a counteroffer," she said, stepping fully into the clearing. "I'm listening. You and your men get back on your horses and ride away. Never come back, never bother me again. In return, I won't kill you where you stand." The silence that followed was broken by Blackwood's delighted laughter. "Oh, my dear Elena, 5 years away from me, and you've developed quite a sense of humor. I'm not joking. You're one woman with a rifle she probably doesn't know how to use, facing 5 armed men who've killed more people than you've had hot dinners. What exactly makes you think you're in a position to make threats?" "This," said a familiar voice from the darkness behind Blackwood. Bo Remington stepped into the clearing, his father's Colt in his hand and murder in his eyes. He was bleeding from a graze on his temple, and his shirt was torn. But he was very much alive. "Impossible," Blackwood snarled. "My men said, your men are either dead or tied up in my barn." Bo said coldly. Turns out they weren't quite as professional as you thought. Jake emerged from the shadows on the other side of the clearing, his rifle trained on Blackwood's remaining gunmen. Had to get a little creative with the tactics, boss. But we managed. How? Blackwood demanded. You made a mistake, Bo said. You assumed I'd hole up in the house and wait for you to come to me. Instead, we slipped out the back while you were focused on the front. Been hunting your people one by one while you were up here making speeches. Rosalie felt tears of relief running down her cheeks. I thought you were dead. The belt buckle took it off one of his men. Figured it might come in handy for a little psychological warfare. The tables had turned completely. Now it was Blackwood and his two remaining men who were outnumbered, caught in a crossfire between Bo and Jake, while Rosalie held the high ground with her rifle. It seems, Bo continued, that you're the one in no position to make threats. But Blackwood wasn't finished. With the desperate cunning of a cornered predator, he reached into his coat and withdrew not a gun, but a small vial of clear liquid. Recognize this, my dear? He asked Rosalie. It's the same compound I used to give you that convenient fever 5 years ago. Amazing stuff, tasteless, odorless, and in the right dose, it destroys memory while leaving the victim alive and controllable. What's your point? Bo asked, but his voice had gone tight with concern. My point is that there's enough here to affect everyone in this clearing. One broken vial, one gust of wind, and you'll all forget this conversation ever happened. Along with everything else you've learned in the past week. You're bluffing. Am I? Would you like to test that theory? Blackwood held the vial higher, his thumb poised over the cork. I've spent 5 years perfecting this formula. One breath, and Elena will forget she ever loved you. You'll forget you ever found her, and I'll be free to take her home and start fresh. The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The only sound was the whisper of wind through the pine trees and the distant cry of a night bird. It was Maria who broke the silence, appearing from the underbrush behind Blackwood like an avenging angel. Enough, she said simply, and brought a heavy tree branch down on Blackwood's wrist. The vial flew from his hand, arcing through the air to shatter against a rock 20 feet away. Whatever poison it contained hissed and steamed for a moment, before dispersing harmlessly into the night breeze. You crazy old woman, Blackwood snarled, clutching his injured wrist. Do you have any idea what you've done? See, Maria said calmly. I have saved us all from a monster. That's when the shooting started. Blackwood's men, seeing their employer's plan in ruins, went for their guns in a desperate attempt to salvage the situation. But they were too slow, too panicked, and too outgunned. Jake's rifle spoke twice, dropping both men before they could. Clear leather. Bo's Colt was trained on Blackwood himself, who stood frozen with his hands half raised, finally understanding that his long run of murder and manipulation had come to an end. It's over, Bo said quietly. No, Blackwood replied, his voice filling with the kind of madness that comes when a man realizes he's lost everything. It's not over. It will never be over. She belongs to me. She's my wife, my property, and I'll never stop hunting her. Never! He lunged forward, not toward his fallen gun, but toward Rosalie herself, his hands reaching for her throat with the desperate strength of complete insanity. The shot that stopped him came from an unexpected source. Rosalie's rifle, held steady despite her shaking hands, put an end to Thomas Blackwood's reign of terror with a single, clean shot to the chest. He fell backward into the dirt, his eyes already growing glassy with approaching death. With his last breath he whispered, "You can't escape what you are." Then he was gone, and the clearing fell silent, except for the sound of Rosalie's ragged breathing and the distant call of that same night bird, indifferent to the human drama that had played out beneath the stars. "It's finished," Bo said, moving to her side and gently taking the rifle from her trembling hands. "Is it?" Rosalie asked, staring down at the man who had stolen so much from her. "Will it ever really be finished?" Yes, he said firmly, pulling her into his arms, because now we have the truth, and the truth is what sets us free. In her palm, she still clutched the tiny document that would bring justice for 12 murdered women. But more than that, she held the promise of a future where the past no longer had the power to destroy the present. The nightmare was over. At last, they could begin to live. 3 months later, the courthouse in Santa Fe buzzed with activity as the territorial judge delivered his verdict in the case that had captivated the entire region. The tiny document from Elena's locket had proven to be the key that unlocked a conspiracy of murder spanning a decade, and the evidence it contained had led to the arrest of Blackwood's remaining associates across 3 territories. The court finds that the marriage between the defendant Thomas Blackwood and the plaintiff Elena Morales was obtained through fraud, coercion, and the administration of illegal substances, Judge Harrison declared, his voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. Said marriage is hereby declared null and void, retroactive to the date of the ceremony. Elena, for she had decided to reclaim her true name along with her freedom, felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Beside her, Bo squeezed her hand gently, his presence a constant source of strength throughout the long legal proceedings. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause, much of it coming from the families of Blackwood's victims who had finally seen justice served. 12 women who had died alone and afraid had been vindicated, their memories honored, their stories told. Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Morrison approached them with a broad smile and a stack of official documents. "Congratulations," he said, shaking Bo's hand and tipping his hat to Eleanor. "The territorial governor himself wanted me to thank you both for your courage in bringing this monster to justice." "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "Now you're free to live your lives without looking over your shoulders," the sheriff replied. "Blackwood's organization has been completely dismantled. The few men who weren't arrested have scattered to the winds, and none of them have any interest in continuing his vendetta." That evening, they returned to the Mesa estate as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to promise better days ahead. The house had been repaired from the damage of that terrible night, but more than that, it felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the shadows of the past had finally been banished. Maria met them at the door, her weathered face glowing with satisfaction and joy. The courage she'd shown during the confrontation had made her something of a local legend, and she wore her newfound fame with characteristic dignity. "Patron, Senora," she said formally, then broke into a radiant smile. "Welcome home." Home. The word carried weight that it never had before. This wasn't just a place where Elena happened to be staying. It was where she belonged, where she was loved, where she could build a future without the burden of a past she couldn't remember or control. That night, they sat together on the stone bench beneath the old cottonwood tree, the same place where they'd shared their first kiss and made their first tentative promises to each other. The air was warm, with the promise of summer, and the stars seemed closer than they ever had before. "Do you ever regret it?" Bo asked quietly, "not remembering who you were before?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. Over the past months, small fragments of memory had begun to return. Glimpses of her childhood, flashes of the young woman she'd been before fear and desperation had driven her to desperate measures. But they felt like someone else's memories, interesting but not essential to who she was now. "No," she said finally. "I think sometimes the mind knows what it's doing when it protects us from things we can't handle. I was so consumed with guilt. And fear before, guilt about the deception, fear about the forced marriage, terror about what Blackwood might do to me. The fever took all of that away and gave me a chance to start fresh. And now? Now I remember enough to know I was lucky to survive, but not so much that I'm haunted by it." She turned to face him, studying his beloved features in the starlight. "I know I loved you before, Bo, Maybe not in the right way, maybe not honestly, but I did love you. And I love you now, completely and without reservation, even though I fell in love with you twice, first as Elena, then as Rosalie, especially because of that. It proves that what we have transcends circumstances, transcends memory, transcends everything that tried to keep us apart. He pulled her closer, and she rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sage that always seemed to cling to him. Maria thinks we should have a proper wedding, he said. Not the rushed ceremony we planned 5 years ago, but something real, something that celebrates who we are now. What do you think? I think, Bo said solemnly, that I want to marry Elena Morales in front of God and everyone we care about, with no secrets between us and no shadows from the past to cloud our future. Then ask me. He slipped from the bench to kneel in the grass before her, taking her hands in his, with the same reverence he might show handling something precious and fragile. Elena Morales, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Will you marry me? Not because of arrangements made by others, not because of duty or convenience, but because we choose each other freely and completely. Yes, she whispered, then louder, with joy ringing in her voice. Yes, absolutely yes. He reached into his pocket and withdrew 2 simple gold bands. No elaborate stones or fancy engravings, just pure metal that would last as long as their love for each other. Where did you get these? She asked, admiring the simple beauty of the rings. I had them made by the jeweler in town, used gold from a claim my father worked years ago. Seemed fitting. Something from this land, something that belongs here just like we do. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the courtyard of the ranch, with the entire community in attendance. Doc Martinez served as one witness, Jake as the other, and Maria as the unofficial mother of the bride. The territorial judge who had annulled her forced marriage to Blackwood performed the ceremony, adding a touch of legal gravity to the celebration. Elena wore a simple white dress that Maria had sewn for her, and Bo wore his best suit with his father's watch chain glinting across his vest. But it wasn't the clothes or the decorations that made the day special. It was the look in their eyes as they spoke vows they had written themselves. I promise to love you, not just for who you are, but for who you're becoming, Elena said, her voice clear and strong. I promise to build a future with you that honors the past without being imprisoned by it. I promise to protect not just your safety, but your freedom to be whoever you choose to be, Bo replied. I promise to love all the different versions of you, the woman you were, the woman you are, and the woman you're still becoming. When they kissed to seal their vows, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers that echoed across the mesa, a sound of pure joy that seemed to chase away the last lingering shadows of darker days. The celebration lasted until well after midnight, with music and dancing and enough food to feed half the territory. But eventually, the guests departed, and the newlyweds found themselves alone in the house that was now truly theirs. In the blue room. Their room now, no longer haunted by memories of loss. They came together as husband and wife with a tenderness that spoke of love tested by fire and proven true. Outside their window, the mesa stretched away under a canopy of stars, and the future lay before them like an unwritten book waiting to be filled with their story. Later, as Elena dozed in Bo's arms, she thought about the woman in the portrait. Downstairs, the frightened, desperate girl who had been willing to live a lie rather than face an unwanted fate. That woman had been brave in her own way, but she had also been trapped by circumstances beyond her control. This woman, Elena as she was now, was free. Free to love, free to choose, free to build a life that was entirely her own. The fever that had stolen her memories had also given her the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to become who she was meant to be. As dawn broke over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility, Eleanor Remington smiled. In her sleep, she was home at last, in every sense of the word that mattered. The silver locket, now empty of its dangerous secrets, rested on the nightstand beside their bed. But it was no longer a repository of hidden truths or evidence of past crimes. It was simply a reminder of the journey they had taken together, from the desert, where a dying woman had been given a second chance, to this moment, where love had conquered every obstacle placed in its path. Outside, the cattle were beginning to stir, and somewhere in the distance Jake was probably already starting the day's work. Life on the ranch would continue as it always had, but now it would be shaped by hope instead of haunted by loss. And in the years to come, when people told the story of the woman who lost her memory and found her true love, they would speak of it as a tale of redemption and second chances, of the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. But for Elena and Bo, it was simply the beginning of the rest of their lives together. A life built on truth, sustained by love, and blessed with the kind of happiness that comes only to those who refuse to give up on each other, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. The past was finally at rest. The future stretched ahead, bright with promise. And in the space between memory and hope, two hearts beat as one, proof that some love stories are strong enough to survive anything, even death itself.